Welcome to the National Press Theatre. Before we begin, we have a few important preventive measures to share to prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incident that can cause injuries. We remind all in-person participants to keep their earpiece away from the microphone at all times. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for the purpose that you will find on the table. Thank you all for your cooperation. You may proceed.
Good morning. Canada's democracy has been under attack by authoritarian regimes. Chief among them is the People's Republic of China. And I'm joined today by leading experts on foreign interference, Sam Cooper, investigative journalist and author of Willful Blindness, 3rd edition, Dr. Charles Burton, senior fellow at Synopsis, and Michelle Junot-Katsuya, former Asia-Pacific desk chief at CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. We're here today to address a question that all Canadians have been asking. Who are the parliamentarians who have been identified in a confidential report by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians? In their special report, paragraph 164 states that NSICOP has, quote, seen troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics, end quote. How can Canada have an election if Canadians don't know whether the people they're voting for has their best interests at heart or if they're serving a foreign master? Nearly every opposition party leader has called for the names of the parliamentarians identified in the NSICOP report, but the Trudeau government refuses to do so. This plays directly into the hands of authoritarians. Until those names are identified, a cloud of suspicion hangs over all parliamentarians, but especially those of Chinese heritage. It's time for the government to come clean to Canadians and defend our democracy. Sam.
Thank you, MP Vuan. I'm here today to highlight some of the names and entities covered in my updated book and to pose a question. Should other Canadian journalists be examining the openly available evidence surrounding these networks? Firstly, my book recounts reporting on a 2020 tape recording provided to me, where Senator Yuen Pao-Wu is heard in a 47-minute private briefing with the Canada Committee 100 Society. This group included Conservative Senator Victor O as an advisory member, along with an individual officially listed in a Chinese United Front Overseas Leaders Group. The Canada Committee 100 Society is led in Vancouver by Ding Guo, a journalist who is also an advisor to British Columbia Premier David Eby. Other journalists participating in this tape-recorded meeting with Senator Wu later supported Liberal candidate Parm Bains in 2021. Bains had told these journalists he opposed Kenny Chu's Foreign Agent Registry Bill, describing it as an exclusionary policy. Ding Guo was also reportedly involved in the 2022 Conservative Party leadership race, alongside community leaders officially connected to Beijing's overseas influence arm, the United Front. I can provide more details later on how this should illuminate NSICOP 2024. In the taped meeting, attendees asked Senator Wu about his stance regarding United Front Work Department community group activities in Canada. These groups, according to CSIS, are central to targeting Canadian politicians for influence and election interference. Senator Wu expressed his concerns about Canada's focus on United Front groups, stating, whether you belong to an organization that happens to be listed as a United Front organization should not be a litmus test, and added, I am fighting very hard against that type of litmus test. To provide the evidence of this tape-recorded meeting, which my colleague Charles Burton, a sinologist and Mandarin language expert, reviewed and analyzed for myself, I'll briefly play a transcript from this meeting.
Having said that, I'm very worried that the mainstream in Canada, including a lot of my friends and political leaders and business leaders and media leaders, are falling into a very dangerous trap where they are using what I call a litmus test to demonstrate the loyalty of Chinese Canadians in this country. We can identify, for example, your views on Hong Kong, your views on Tibet, your views on leaders, your views on South China Sea, whether you belong to an organization that is officially part of the United Front. You know, many organizations are listed as part of a United Front list of organizations, and the fact that you are simply associated with one is often used as a litmus test. And this is not a good development that I'm seeing.
Mr. Burton, the sinologist and Mandarin language expert, reviewed the full tape recording and told me, quote, Senator Wu's briefing to Canada Committee 100 Society effectively enables the legitimacy of agencies of the Chinese Communist Party in our country. This does call into question Senator Wu's intervener status in the inquiry. Senator Wu didn't comment to me about his remarks, but said I should question the Hogue Commission, who also didn't comment. Ding Guo has said there is nothing inappropriate with Canada Committee 100 Society activities. Therefore, in Willful Blindness 3rd edition update, I write, in a way, Senator Wu's intervention in the Hogue Commission seemed to fulfill his taped pledge to the United Front. He repeatedly filed submissions undermining Canadian intelligence and using Chinese intelligence talking points. My confidence that he appeared to act for Beijing was bolstered by information from a person I call Confidential Source 1, who confirmed that Senator Wu, appointed by Justin Trudeau, was under CSIS investigation. Confidential Source 2 also repeatedly stressed that Conservative Senator Victor O, an advisor to the Canada Committee 100 Society, was a significant target in CSIS's investigation into federal election interference. In Willful Blindness, I write about investigations that began in early 2019. I write, according to 3 national security sources, Liberal Cabinet Minister Mary Ng was identified in CSIS investigations as one of 11 Toronto area candidates clandestinely supported by Chinese consulate and United Front influence networks in the 2019 election. CSIS assessed that Mary Ng was unwittingly implicated in this interference network. Despite my requests, Mary Ng and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office never responded for comment. As I write in Willful Blindness, Mary Ng was one of the key Ontario Liberal government staffers who moved to Ottawa with Trudeau, alongside more high-profile advisors like Katie Telford and Gerald Butts. 2 national security sources indicated that a specific CSIS concern was Ng's staff allegedly meeting privately with a Toronto consulate diplomat to consult on China-related issues. CSIS identified this diplomat, Zhou Wei, as a confirmed intelligence actor. According to one source, quote, we believe Zhou Wei worked with political staffers to provide information on meetings of elected officials and their whereabouts. We know staff have direction to report privately to the consulate on Mary Ng, end quote. This is a critical detail hinted at in the Hogue Commission's initial report, which, for some reason, did not disclose the involvement of Mary Ng's staff with Zhou Wei or clarify what this implies about Ng's position in Trudeau's cabinet. Thank you.
Charles. Okay. Well, Sam Cooper's work these past many years has performed an important service for Canada in exposing the Chinese Communist Party's malign challenges to our democratic institutions and our rule of law. The issue now is the Government of Canada and the Parliament should do what to set things right? Justice Marie-Josée Og's Foreign Interference Commission appears to be floundering as the government, fearing negative exposure, withholds the most critical documents and engages in self-interested obfuscation. Moreover, Bill C-70's effectiveness will be in the interpretation of the language, such as the definition of in association with that Senator Wu talks about, the regulations developed to implement that bill, and the inclinations of whoever the government appoints as Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner. If we don't get it right, we could end up with a Foreign Influence Transparency Registry that will have no names on it. Sam's work has benefited from the willingness of confidential informants to share classified materials with him. These are the people that the Prime Minister has denounced as criminals. They are accused of endangering Canada's national security by potentially exposing informants and methods of intelligence collection. But is this so? Can we point to any negative effects on Canada of Sam's reporting? It seems to the contrary that Sam's work is rather of benefit to protecting us from China's agenda to undermine Canada's sovereignty and national security. If so, this calls upon our government to become more forthcoming with what classified investigations learn about China's malign activities. In this regard, we have a lot to learn from Australia, the UK, and the US. They shouldn't have to give it to Sam, although good thing that they do. May 2023 CTV report entitled, "Why Does Canada Have a Disproportionately High Number of Chinese Diplomats?" revealed that there are 176 Chinese nationals with diplomatic credentials in Canada. In contrast, the United Kingdom's active database of foreign representatives shows that there are 124 Chinese diplomats working on British soil, 50 fewer than there are here in Canada, despite the UK having a larger population of 67.3 million, with 4.7 million people identifying as ethnic Han Chinese in Britain. According to Canada's 2021 census, there are just over 1.7 million people of Chinese origin living in Canada. While Canadian demographics are like Australia, we have nearly 3 times as many Chinese foreign representatives here. Australia has granted diplomatic credentials to 64 Chinese officials compared to Canada's 176. The numbers of Chinese diplomats in Canada indeed look disproportionate, considering that the United Kingdom has 44 accredited representatives in Canada, while Japan has 73. So assuming that China certainly does not require this number of accredited diplomats in Canada to fulfill legitimate diplomatic functions here, the large numbers of diplomatic passport holders from China working here in Canada would likely show that a high proportion of China's diplomatic cohort here in Canada handles diplomatic influence operations that have tipped over into interference activities. Michelle has suggested about 70% of them are not engaged in legitimate diplomatic functions. This is markedly apparent in the uncommonly large Chinese consular establishments in Toronto and Vancouver that Sam has written about at length. The U.S. Department of State Advisor for U.S.-China Bilateral Affairs, Ryan Fedusiuk, has calculated that the budget of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department exceeds that of the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This suggests, because China has so much resources into the kinds of activities that Sam has been exposing, that as a matter of national priority, CSIS and the RCMP need considerable augmentation of their resources to match the scale of the resources hostile foreign nations allocate to their programming designed to subvert Canadian parliamentary democracy. We need the same amount of people working against them as are working to subvert our country. In addition, there needs to be a considerable restructuring of these counter-subversion measures, including much stronger integration of the relevant elements of Global Affairs Canada, CSIS, CSE, and the RCMP at the working level. Finally, here in Canada, we can observe former cabinet ministers, former ambassadors to China, and people retired from senior roles in our foreign ministry who have assumed lucrative China-related opportunities after leaving government service. It would be very difficult for Bill C-70, the Foreign Influence, Transparency and Accountability Act, to track the silent implication of future payoffs for officials who took the Chinese Ministry of State Security's bait years earlier and therefore are not following up on documents produced by security agents calling for the government to do something about Chinese malign activities in Canada. So we need other mechanisms to deal with this issue of people after retirement who may have been neutral or possibly even wittingly served Chinese interests from gaining benefits from a foreign power. I would point out that officials who have security clearance in Canada are bound by a lifetime ban on their revealing or benefiting from the classified information that they gain knowledge of in the course of their work. I would suggest a commensurate measure would be lifetime restriction on persons who have had influence on Canada's foreign and security policy from assuming positions that include income or benefits from hostile nation foreign services after they leave government work. So I've recommended here 4 rather obvious and simple actions for the next government to consider after Justice Ogg releases her report on December 31st. But the history of the Canadian government's adopting the recommendations of commissions, whether they're royal commissions or just commissions, has not been good. But if our government blows this matter off with lip service and no substantive follow-up, I believe strongly that history will judge them very badly. Thank you.
Je vais faire mes commentaires en français. Le Canada est vraiment à une époque historique. On est à un tournant. Les découvertes que l'on a faites lors de la commission Ogg nous révèlent jusqu'à quel point les services de renseignement étrangers, qu'ils soient chinois, qu'ils soient russes, qu'ils soient iraniens, qu'ils soient de d'autres pays, comme Israël ou autres, ont pu travailler ardemment pendant des années avec une grande complicité de plusieurs élus. Évidemment, le prix que l'on a à payer, c'est la perte de confiance de la part du public, de la part dans nos institutions, dans nos élus, dans notre système démocratique. Ça semble un peu de la théorie. Ça semble un peu un cours universitaire avec des propos qui semblent un peu abstraits. Mais dans les faits, on peut voir aujourd'hui jusqu'à quel point ils ont réussi à miner la confiance du public dans nos institutions, dans nos élus, à un point tel que maintenant, les menaces directement adressées ou dirigées contre nos élus ne sont même plus subtiles, ne sont même plus cachées comme elles l'ont déjà été pendant des décennies. Avec la découverte des révélations qui ont été faites grâce au lanceur d'alerte qui a été héroïque et qui a mis de l'avant plus un code moral qu'un code éthique, même si les institutions vont essayer de retrouver le ou les lanceurs d'alerte, on ne serait pas aujourd'hui à en parler si ça n'avait pas été du courage de ces individus qui ont donné aux médias, comme à Sam, des informations si importantes et si cruciales. Le concept de la sécurité nationale au Canada est vraiment, vraiment à être revu. La culture de la sécurité nationale au Canada doit être aussi revue. On doit revoir notre façon de procéder, d'enquêter et d'éliminer éventuellement des gens qui ont réussi à gagner accès au processus de décision parce que, comme il a été mentionné dans des livres, dont celui de Sam, on est devenu accro à l'argent de puissance étrangère et particulièrement de la Chine. C'est grave ce que l'on a appris et je pense que la commission Ogg ne s'attendait même pas à entendre certaines des révélations que l'on a entendues, mais qui a mis en lumière aussi des gros problèmes systémiques que l'on existe. À titre d'exemple, Affaires mondiales Canada fait partie du problème, ne fait pas partie de la solution. Et ça depuis des décennies. Il y a un esprit de contradiction dans le système avec les consultations et les commentaires faits au premier ministre, au conseil privé, en provenance de Affaires mondiales. Il y a, j'ose le dire, un ménage sérieux de fond à faire chez Affaires mondiales parce que certaines analyses sont foncièrement erronées. Le sont-elles volontairement ou le sont-elles accidentellement? Le résultat est le même, mais chose est certaine, il faut nettoyer la place. Il faut nettoyer la place aussi avec le projet de loi C-70 qui ne va pas là où il devrait aller et suffisamment. D'avoir, à titre d'exemple, un commissaire aux affaires à l'ingérence étrangère qui se rapporte directement au ministre de la Sécurité publique, ben, c'est 4,30 sous pour une pièce. C'est exactement ce que l'on a à l'heure actuelle, une chaîne unidirectionnelle qui va du ministre de la Sécurité publique au premier ministre. Eux, ils contrôlent l'information et ils l'utilisent comme bon il semble, mais pas nécessairement informer la Chambre des communes ou d'informer le peuple canadien. Et c'est là le gros problème de la sécurité nationale. Oui, la sécurité nationale se doit de fonctionner dans un certain secret. On l'entend, on le comprend. Mais il y a des fonctions essentielles qu'au SCRS, on doit avoir, et à la GRC, d'informer le public, d'éduquer le public, et d'éduquer en particulier, les élus, qui sont les premières cibles des puissances étrangères. Ce que l'on apprend par le travail de gens comme Sam Cooper, comme des gens du SCRS ou de la GRC, c'est jusqu'à quel point les services étrangers de plusieurs puissances ont pu travailler pendant des années à raffiner et à ramasser la collaboration de plusieurs élus. Aujourd'hui, c'est assez. Et la politicaillerie auquel on assiste, que ce soit M. Poilievre qui refuse d'aller lire le rapport alors qu'il a non seulement les droits, la responsabilité d'aller lire et de découvrir qui sont les membres de son parti qui collaborent avec une puissance étrangère et qui refuse de le faire en prétextant demain vouloir être le premier ministre du Canada, mais c'est une blague. C'est une farce. Un premier ministre aujourd'hui en poste qui ne va pas suffisamment assez loin et assez rapidement pour protéger notre pays, c'est un problème. Alors, il faut vraiment aujourd'hui commencer à prendre conscience que le pays est mal en point. Nos alliés ont perdu confiance en nous, confiance que l'on avait au plus haut point avant, il y a plusieurs décennies, mais maintenant qui est érodée au plus haut point. Il faut rectifier cette situation le plus rapidement possible. De manière opérationnelle, on est au courant de ce qui se passe. On connaît les noms. On sait qui collabore. Et ce n'est pas qu'au niveau fédéral, c'est au niveau provincial et c'est au niveau des grandes villes aussi. Que ce soit Toronto, que ce soit Vancouver, que ce soit même Ottawa à une certaine époque. Il faut être capable d'enlister et d'amener avec nous aussi les provinces et peut-être même les grandes villes à travailler avec nous au niveau de la sécurité nationale. Il est temps de faire le ménage. C'est sérieux.
Merci. We'll now proceed to the question period. As a reminder, one question, one follow-up. We'll start in the room. Brian?
Good morning. Brian Passif from Toronto Sun. During the Prime Minister's testimony last month, there were allegations of a foreign government's attempted to upend a Liberal candidate's campaign due to their views being contrary to the foreign government's interests. Last year, I wrote about Kevin's ill-fated campaign to run for the Liberals and his allegations that China had a hand in his ouster as a Liberal candidate. Questions for Sam. Do you believe Kevin was that candidate?
I also covered Kevin Vaughan's allegations of what he believed occurred. I did a lengthy videotaped interview with MP Vuan on his allegations, and I looked into his case for months. I also read your report and others, and I had no idea that this new top-tier case would be tabled at the Hague Commission. When I saw the allegations that a foreign government had allegedly targeted a candidate because of their stances on that government, that type of case appeared consistent with Kevin's allegations. I can share the detail that in my own investigations, I heard from several Liberal Party of Canada sources that alleged after it became clear that Kevin Vuan would be the nominee in his Toronto riding, a senior Liberal Party member allegedly started to communicate within the party, making efforts to wind back that nomination. So this is an interesting flag for me on the plausibility that MP Vuan's case could be that serious case alleged in the Hague Commission. Other details that were interesting were that a news story was published alleging sexual misconduct, as you wrote, Brian, about MP Vuan. He had already, he was already in place to run, so it was up to the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister to withdraw his candidacy, and that occurred. What I gathered from the Prime Minister's testimony is he said he was not aware from intelligence of the allegations. Of course, he didn't refer to what member of his party could have been targeted. But I can say that consistent with the PRC being the by far the biggest targeter of Canadian candidates, whether they be friends of China, neutral and convincible, or foes of China, it's consistent with allegations in New York in an FBI counterintelligence probe that when China's Ministry of State Security wanted to block the congressional candidacy of a U.S. former, an Army veteran who had come from China being a Tiananmen Square activist. The FBI says, and indictments say, China didn't want him to run, so local networks, proxies were employed by the Ministry of State Security with plots uncovered in intercepted communications, including that campaign workers be implanted in that individual's campaign to perhaps gather compromising activity. There were a part of the plot was potentially harming the candidate in ways that would preclude them from running, so physical violence. In Canada, I'm aware in my coverage of cases and networks that came up in the Hague Commission from looking into my reports, I noticed a pattern that an individual that my sources indicated China wanted out of the way or Chinese proxies wanted out of the way was the subject of news stories alleging sexual impropriety. And, that my sources indicated that this could have been part of a plot. So to sum up my answer, with everything I know and my subject matter expertise on China as the #1 threat actor targeting candidates that they see as critical to their geopolitical aims, it is plausible that Kevin could be the case. And I think the Prime Minister, I judge, would have the answer. CSIS would have the answer. The Hague Commission probably has the answer. So I think, as I sit here today, in my opinion, if Mr. Vuan was harmed in that way and targeted in that way, I do think, if I was him, I'd want a public explanation and a type of exoneration for a lot of things, if that's what occurred. Let me stress, I've only seen the patterns. This is part of my investigative methods to see, what sources say, can it be corroborated? I do think it's plausible that his case could be that one referred to.
Brian, can I add? So I think in my mind and in my heart, what happened to me was not an accident, but by design. And I obviously reserve getting into, I think, very intricate details on the advice of my legal counsel, but On this point, I think I can say from fact that one of the individuals who are no longer sitting with the Liberal caucus was the MPP for the riding that I now represent federally. And it's important to note that this is a riding that is not only home to Toronto's Chinatown, but where 1 in 7 of my constituents, like me, are of Chinese heritage. So by association, I think one can only assume to the best of their ability, where there is smoke, there is a lot of fire. You know, there are questions that need to be answered. What precipitated his departure? What did he allegedly do, irrespective of his voting record on China? And I can tell you for a fact that I have never had Toronto's Chinese Consul General on my speed dial, but can others say the same?
We'll go now online. Yeah. People on Zoom, if you have any question right now, please use the raise hand function. There's no question. That will conclude the press conference. Thank you.
Great. Just to conclude, I think it's important to point out that if this happened in the United States, there would be a special prosecutor appointed immediately. And this government is dragging it out. Why? Reluctance is abetting. What's the point of having a law? Why are we protecting individuals who are harming our country, our democracy, our people, and our interests? And this government needs to tell us why. Because frankly, I'm fed up with having to pay the price for it. Because being a doormat is not a policy. And it's time to step up and defend our democracy. Thank you. And thank you to Sam, thank you to Charles, and thank you to Michelle.